Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of monarchastrology.com, bringing you the astrology forecast for July 21st to July 27th, 2021. The moon will grow full in Aquarius this week, and the moon will be sandwiched right between Pluto in Capricorn and Saturn in Aquarius. So I can just show you a visual real quick of what I'm talking about. We have here the full moon, and you can see that the moon is right in between Pluto in late Capricorn and Saturn in 10 degrees Aquarius. And that the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020 has, been separating, but it's like this lunation brings them together because you have the moon building this link and forming a conjunction between both. And with the sun in Leo being the source of light reflected here by this moon in Aquarius, by this Pluto moon Saturn, it feels like a ripening of meta awareness, Aquarius, about the self. Aquarius is a brilliant observer and seer of patterns. Because Saturn Pluto is such a serious complex, some of the meta self-awareness that is gathering this week may be psychologically challenging or psychologically provocative. The Saturn-Pluto combination relates to psychological contraction, extreme reactions or solutions to psychological threats, epic reserves of willpower in the face of adverse conditions, and the general tendency to try to manage or control nature and nature within. So things like the spontaneity or chaos of our emotions, grief, eros, our inner wilderness. At a higher level, Saturn Pluto can relate to living responsibly with the wild forces of nature within us, and a transformation of one's psyche and worldview to facilitate that relationship with nature as opposed to walling it off. We have to think about the kind of cultural conditioning that we've received. And so there is a lot of control-based, patriarchal extraction of nature kind of conditioning. So changing our relationship with the universe and the ecosystem around us is a transformative process from what we've been conditioned with in a lot of cases. It can really become a transformation of one's understanding of control and what it means to surrender control. I'll link my article below on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020, which I wrote, about Saturn and Pluto both in Capricorn, but just as an example of like what it means when these planets come together, I really parsed that out. And while this is not an energy that seems very light or playful, right, it is the sun in Leo that is giving its light to this lunation, suggesting that these corners of our psyche are part of our wholeness. If we are attuned to seeing the gameplay of this all, how we came to Earth to evolve as souls, that all of our experiences can be alchemical, that things happen for us, not to us, right? Getting out of that, any kind of victim psychology and more into how am I an alchemist here? How can I work with the raw materials that I've been given? Then here, self-awareness, even in challenging forms, comes as a boon, right? It means that we can begin to navigate the world with increasingly greater honesty and authenticity. And if deeper self-awareness is a shame trigger for you, generally, or this week in particular, if it's a reason to persecute ourselves, we may want to simply notice that and soften there. So before I get into this week in more detail, I have a few announcements. I forgot to say that, please like this video, leave a comment, let me know what you think or what you're resonating with. Subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so that you know when new videos come out. You can also click the link in the notes to join my mailing list. That is a place where I'll send you a written version of this forecast every week, along with the link to the YouTube, and also where I share announcements, where I share when my astrology readings are open to book, I pretty much only tell the mailing list these days. You can also find me on Instagram at Sabrina Monarch. And yeah, so we just did a Kickstarter campaign to fund a year ahead of these forecasts, and Magic of the Spheres podcast. 157 of you came forward, and together we raised $31,905. So I am stunned. I feel so grateful, and just, this was huge. I just feel so supported. I wrote something that I shared to social media as we had crossed 30K yesterday. So I'll just share that with you because I feel like I can express myself better by reading this. But receiving this level of funding is really healing. It's literally being paid to be a content creator. Symbolically, it says a lot to me about community. And it's inspiring me to settle more deeply into the intrinsic why of, why I share these ideas and videos and podcasts with you. So as I have a new podcast episode out with Kelsey, and I had Kelsey Rose, and I'd shortly gotten a human design reading from her, and then published the podcast. And I was really helped from this reading to drop into a deeper level of peace with my energies, right? Like I was getting kind of overwhelmed of like holding this thought bubble over my head all the time of all the things I have to do and what I have to get done, etc. And when I drop that pressure layer off and just tune into the inspiration, it's like I get to just talk about astrology, and I get to have inspiring conversations and share them with people on the podcast. I get to study and share astrology and support astrological literacy. Like I love this all so much. And the Kickstarter was an ask to be supported by the community for these free offerings, these videos, the forecasts, the podcast, because they take hours each week to produce. And it can feel like a lot to hold that along with generating an income entirely from teaching and seeing clients. And so even though I love all of this work, at that level of consistent production and having my incomes, solely coming from the teaching and client work, it can feel like I'm working myself to a point of self-extraction. And I had never wanted to give up publishing. That's literally the signal that puts me in touch with you, who's listening or watching right now, and all the wonderful people that I get to meet. So I decided to ask for support. This funding really gives me wings. It gives this work wings. I still do teach and see clients, but I feel really supported. I don't feel like I'm carrying this all on my own. I feel held in my life, humbled, and like I can sink deeper into the intrinsic enjoyment of being an astrologer and a podcaster and have fun and feel resourced while I'm doing it. So I look forward to forecasting for another year and seeing where conversations on Magic of the Spheres take us. Thank you so much for being a part of it and helping fundraise these public works. My novel, The Garden of Sleeping Hammers, is out. You can find it. I'm working on getting it on other platforms, but you can buy it through Barnes & Noble, paperback or hardcover. Links are also below. The next intensive is coming up November 8th. I haven't set up, there was early enrollment through the Kickstarter, and in the coming days or weeks, I'll be setting up the enrollment that you can do through the course page itself. And I have a new episode of Magic of the Spheres with Kelsey Rose that's timed really well. We talked about Aries and Chiron in Aries, and I released this during the time period of Chiron station retrograde. So that's already kind of like an infused, louder energy in the air we talked about last week. So you can pick up on that conversation. And Kelsey has some really like beautiful ideas about the signs from doing a psychonautic journey with the sun as the sun ingresses into the various signs. So really interesting stuff here about the archetype of Cancer and how Cancer relates to the matrix, or how the matrix and the mother, come from the same root word. Like, this conversation just felt like packed full of gems. So go ahead and listen to that if you haven't caught it already. And I will get into our week now. On July 21st, 2021, Venus enters Virgo at 5:36 p.m. Pacific. I feel like it's so Virgo just to like give the exact times, but I do that, regardless of the transits. Venus will stay in Virgo until August 15. And with Venus in Virgo, we may experience or notice in others a greater willingness to adjust in order to relate. In one of its more pleasing expressions, Venus in Virgo is incredibly thoughtful and conscientious. Taking into account others' needs or requests and altering one's behavior can come across as a gesture of care. The lover, the friend, the confidant listens and changes. Intimacy comes through in these details. It's really interesting. I've noticed that sometimes people who have like strong Leo energy will actually have these strong perspectives on don't apologize, don't be apologetic. You have nothing to be sorry for, or especially at least only apologize if you really mean it. Like, don't just say sorry, like, oh, don't overuse that word. By the time we get to Virgo, there's a lot more apology. So that sense of like, this can go into a certain direction of being like, oh, I've done bad, or I am bad, like going far with it in terms of like a self-flagellating, like shame. I have to repent, like Judeo-Christian kind of like infusion into the Virgo Pisces axis. And at a more maybe like balanced relational level, it's like the humility of realizing, oh, I didn't fully honor this connection, or I wasn't fully present in this moment, and I wasn't as caring as I could have been. And I want to go back and name that, acknowledge it, and like lay that at the altar of our love, right? So Venus in Virgo can really have that kind of like apology be a strong energy. Discussions around what isn't in alignment in relationship can come up. Venus in Virgo tends to care more about these details and workshopping them, like the craft of love. And I think craft tends to relate to noticing these intricate details of how things are going and how we want to improve them. That's what it means to be honing our craft. There's also, a kind of transcendent awareness or sense of how things could be that we wish to aspire to. Inwardly, there can be more confrontations with our disappointment in others because we want them to be something other than what they are. Depending on the situation or our own patterning, these confrontations could be meaningful in the sense of them being a kind of sobriety, seeing things as they are, as opposed to a fantasy. And in that awareness, we get to make more sober choices. Or this kind of inner confrontation may signal to us that we are overly critical and could benefit from extending compassion to ourselves and to others. So it's hard to say, like, there's no blanket one size fits all here, that if we want others to be, more than what they are, what that implies in terms of how we need to adjust our actions and expectations, how available or unavailable we are. It's very situationally dependent, but I think a theme that comes up with Venus in Virgo is that yearning to edit or alter or improve. A key tension to be aware of with Venus in Virgo is the capacity to hold awareness of how something could improve and be refined, and how we navigate worthiness and pleasure. Can you feel how holding both at the same time requires a kind of bandwidth? Like, I can still love myself and my imperfections. I can still love this relationship and its imperfections. I read something really beautiful one time in like some book about relationship, but there was an image about like a room that's kind of like a metaphor for the relationship, and there's a leak in the ceiling, and do you focus all your energy on the leak in the ceiling and you don't want to connect until that leak is fixed, or do you create a warm fire and gather together by it while you are in the process of fixing that leak, while it takes time to fix it yourself or have someone come in, and whatever, how we want to go with this metaphor. But that sense of, is your heart still open even when there's a process happening of improvement? Or is the heart closed until the improvement has completed? And in relationship, and anywhere in our lives, like I experience it a lot in terms of like my physical environment. Like I don't feel like I'm organized in every single room of the place that I occupy or the place that I live. It's like one space may be clean, but another, there's a mess somewhere. And it's never felt complete, or it's like you're organized, you're on top of something in one area of your life, but something else isn't. And it's like, is your heart still open even though there's more to get done? There's always more to get done. It's never fully finished. So it's a surrendering to that imperfection. Another manifestation to consider here is the exploration of technique. So we have Virgo as a Mercury ruled sign. And techniques, so as a kind of mercurial thing, craft, technique, in the realm of Venus, connection, pleasure, relating, it's almost like not being too precious to say that intimacy is all about a feeling or an emotional connection. It's definitely part of it. Some kind of flow that just happens magically on its very own. Having skill as a communicator and as a lover is a factor as well. Outside of the context of connection, these techniques themselves in isolation may be kind of dry, but merged and combined with connection, otherworldly. So there may be some kind of impetus during this season to hone the techniques of love and communication and of lovership. So stay open to those opportunities or openings as they arise. Or as you go and pursue that knowledge. As Venus in Virgo also highlights discernment, knowing what we are uninterested in may also matter, and not trying to convince ourselves otherwise. As the Virgin, Virgo can be content to be alone rather than in unaligned connection. However, those details of what is a hard no is a journey of self-awareness as well, and it can be a practice of experimentation and self-noticing to really discover where we draw these lines. But there is something to be said here about not overriding our opening, like going for something that we don't actually want because we like the idea of it, but it's not actually true in our body. I think there's a way to tune in with the honesty of like, do I really desire this? Is this really true? And it may be true that we want to want something, right? And feeling into nurturing that, even nurturing that opening process. But that also means allowing our desire to speak and not to override it, which also means listening to where we aren't in desire. And I think Venus and Virgo can really have that uninterested energy of like, I don't know, this doesn't do it for me. I'm fine in my own temple. I don't prefer that. And similarly, also loving the craft of love and having maybe a more particular set of preferences with Venus in Virgo. On July 22nd, Venus in 0 degrees of Virgo will oppose Jupiter in 0 degrees of Pisces. Jupiter's retrograde and passing, on its way out back into Aquarius. This opposition between Venus in Virgo and Jupiter in Pisces will happen at 5:45 p.m., July 22nd, Pacific time. In general, the Virgo-Pisces axis can relate to numinous shifts that occur when we do the smallest thing, or how small things are in themselves, potentially numinous. When we create an altar or a ritual space, even a very simple setup can be a cue to the gods that we are wanting to commune with them. If we shift one small thought pattern or belief, or entertain one small and bright thought, like one thought of possibility, a new opportunity arises that could actually be huge in the scheme of our lives. So with Venus in Virgo opposite Jupiter in Pisces, it may draw attention in our experience to these micro shifts that we make that enable a much larger opportunity to make itself known. I was talking with a friend in the last week who said something about meeting her partner and how there was some kind of internal emotional block that she had just cleared before she met him that made the space. And I think it's interesting because in the process, one can be ambitious about clearing, detox, health cleanse, fix myself so that my life works out. Like you can get very kind of vicious about that process of self-improvement or clearing the clutter and everything. There's also just a truth of how that process is wanting to unfold and the timing and the magic and the miracle of it. And we only have to participate with it, but it's hard to force. But just thinking about that process for you of like, what are these little changes that you make that actually kind of, I think about the quantum field, for example, and I think about these etheric, like irrigation canals that share energy, like circulation in the body, like the bloodstream, and that we can have our channels clogged by beliefs and thought forms that are at a deeper level, not receptive to a particular energy that's wanting to come through. So part of the opening to love or abundance, or whatever it is that we're calling in, is clearing those clogs in the channel. Again, it doesn't have to be vicious. It doesn't have to be self-persecutory, but it is kind of that looking inward to see, where am I actually closed off or not open? And can I open in those places? Can I shift my beliefs? Can I let go of a stubborn belief? And seeing how once that breaks apart the kind of calcification in the channel, that energy from the quantum field can rush into that space. The sun enters Leo at 7:26 a.m. Maybe p.m. I don't know. I think I'm out of order here. But the sun enters Leo around this time. And Leo relates to our experience of wholeness, being an individual with a centered consciousness. So all the parts of us are organized into a concept of self. I think people can have a hard time with this. I see it a lot with conversations about how people want to show up on social media, where it's like, my brand is spiritual, so I have to look spiritual all the time. I can't show myself doing something that is remotely unspiritual, right? Like, where's that line drawn? Or like, I have to appear very serious in public and I can't show my irreverent side. Like whatever it is, just like why there's certain parts of ourselves that we don't think fit into our identity as if we're not already multifaceted beings, and that we have parts within us that are contradictory. And I think that Leo really brings in this idea of centration, like it all fits, like you get to be a multidimensional being, and it all somehow is organized into the umbrella of your essence. And this organized self, as I'm saying, can still hold contradictions or various aspects of personality that don't seem to make sense together. The point is that they're claimed. Whatever we refuse to claim about ourselves, what we hold shame about, like we don't include it. There's a recent or a little bit farther back podcast episode with Wendy May, where she's talking about purpose and how purpose relates to wholeness, and how wholeness relates to shadow, and shadow is not just what we think of as bad, but it's also various parts of ourselves that we are afraid of owning, and how being authentic is being with all of these things. So we could be ashamed that we have privilege. We could be ashamed that we don't have privilege. We can be ashamed that we're loud. We can be ashamed that we're quiet and shy. You can be ashamed about anything, right? I don't know really anyone that doesn't have something about themselves that they have shame about. Like shame is one of the energetics of this life. But learning how to work with and befriend our whole selves can be like activating a superpower. Claiming the royal inheritance of selfhood, the divinity that we each are, is a process of accepting who we actually are in our fullness and our multidimensionality, in the parts of ourselves that we shut away. In all the ways that we don't, the parts of ourselves that we shut off to or don't approve of, we are more susceptible to judging others, jealousy, scarcity, and being triggered by the expression of others. In the ways that we lean the deepest into our royal inheritance, the more we are transcendently generous and inspirational. So I think Leo is a gorgeous sign. I feel that it's a conversation that it really opens up about royalty and confidence. And it's also, I think, a sign very connected with shame and the prowess, or like pride, like healthy pride in oneself, and also the quality of cultural or familial shame. Like if you stand out in a certain way, if that is either celebrated, right, as something given attention to in a celebratory way, or if it's like, put that away, that doesn't fit in here. Whatever it is, it can just even be the kid in school who doesn't sit still. And it's like that form of expression, that fidgeting, isn't allowed in this space, and it's shamed there, right? And so every different, environment or system or culture has different traits that are approved of and valued or shamed. And then at a personal level, from whatever experiences we've had in life, we tend to have like a shadow of parts of ourselves that we don't fully claim because they haven't been mirrored or validated or approved of by people in our environment, especially when we were children. And so to think like that really creative, vibrant person isn't just flying high with like all their epic, amazing, beautiful qualities that we all celebrate. There's actually, I think, a full ownership and approval of a lot of qualities that were hard to approve of. And I know we all have those places where it's like unique to us. Like I feel okay showing up and being seen in this part of my personality, but I don't want anyone to see me in this other part of my personality. And what it means to include all of it and be that powerful in our beings, I think, is really that brightness of Leo that we tend to admire and celebrate, or feel triggered by, because it shows us where we are not giving full expression to our natures. On July 23rd, there is the full moon in 1 degree of Aquarius at 7:37 p.m. Pacific. The moon will be forming a conjunction to Pluto in late Capricorn as well as Saturn in 10 degrees of Aquarius, as we discussed at the beginning. The moon, by aspecting both Pluto and Saturn, practically brings Saturn and Pluto together. Again, this is an archetypal complex, which is challenging, but can also signify deep and powerful labor and transformation. And think about labor too, like we use labor for work. We also use labor for giving birth. Labor pains. Pluto is a deeply primal thing, archetype. And Saturn is like the bones, the structure of our life. And so to think about the birthing, the labor pains of parts of what has been our structure, our womb, for example, that we're being birthed out of, when that begins to crack open, or open, doesn't necessarily crack, but it can feel like it's cracking if we are very controlling or rigid or scared or contracted around certain things. I have to be a certain way. Life has to be a certain way in order for me to feel okay. And the second that that's disturbed, like I feel psychologically threatened, like that dynamic, and how life brings interruptions, right? Like nature is wild. Control, like we don't have that ultimate level of power. There's a degree that we are able to control certain things, but it takes a lot of energy to control or suppress something. Mark Jones uses an image, and I think The Soul Speaks, of like holding something that can float on the surface of the water, like down like deep below the water, and just all the pressure it takes to hold it below the water, and how the second you let go, it erupts and bursts, right? So dealing with Saturn Pluto, I think, is like confronting that wildness that we've attempted to control, how much energy it takes to control that, how threatened we feel at some level of like, I'm being consumed by this wild energy, and now I feel like a mess or a fool or whatever it is that we judge ourselves for being if we are that not in control of something. And how, yes, this can feel like a kind of ego death, kind of intense experience. And the more we lean into this kind of thing in terms of growth and awakening, the less it makes sense to try to be in a controlled and contracted state. And to have some compassion for how we got there in the first place, if control is a major theme for you, or where it shows up in your life. But what's the deeper structure, the deeper sense of order, Saturn, that's wanting to come through from a more natural as opposed to constructed place? So some thoughts on this lunation. If we're not interested in seeing ourselves, so we hide from ourselves, I could see this lunation being more unpleasant. Like that's a thing to see yourself in the mirror in a Saturn, Pluto, Moon, and Aquarius kind of vibe. However, if we're interested in the deeper, grittier facets of self, the parts of ourselves where we are mysterious to our own selves, this lunation could be a moment of clearer seeing of something more stirring or provocative about ourselves. If we're avoiding change and don't want to see clearly, these confrontations feel like more like something to be victimized by or feel threatened by. However, if the idea of deeper intimacy with ourselves and with life turns us on, then I think that this lunation might be pleasantly disturbing, like a dream that jars you. There's something about this Aquarian full moon sandwiched between Saturn and Pluto that feels like a moment of reckoning in the mirror, like restorative awareness. I think there's also it's not like there's something bad here. Like, it's having a deeper level of approval for something that we have not been able to approve of before. I think often the more that we mature psychologically, the more content comes up to the surface for us to be with, right? Or the more that we awaken spiritually, the more comes up from the deep psyche. The more we open to love, the more depth we can hold. There's like these gates of awakening that open when we increase our bandwidth or capacity to hold. And so just thinking about, if you celebrate these deeper, more challenging layers of awareness coming to the surface, and how slow and tender and caring you can be with them as well, I think that would be a real gift or offering of this lunation. Shadow work naturally happens in relationship and in community. The reflections that we receive from others, direct and indirect, illuminate parts of ourselves which we couldn't see on our own. You may consider how willing you are to be penetrated and influenced by life itself versus how much you are in avoidance of these reflections that life is naturally offering. With Leo being the source of the light here, the sun, that the moon is reflecting in Aquarius, something to consider might be how close or connected we feel with others in the community, in our friendships, in our relationships in general, based on the expression or performance that we give off. Leo, when we pretend to be someone we're not, the reflections we get from life are in relationship with the false self, which creates all kinds of distortions and loneliness. Likewise, when we allow ourselves to be seen in our truth and we deepen into that truth ourselves, the reflections from others can feel electrifyingly resonant, Aquarius, and intensely vulnerable as well. These can just be subtle things, it's like, what parts of yourself do you make available to be seen? And then how do you get reflections from the environment based on what you have expressed? And if you hide certain parts of yourself and put to the forefront other parts, those are the parts you'll be getting a reflection from. And sometimes the environment can sense that you're holding something back too. And there will be a mirror reflection of that. Performance, can be an art form. And certainly too, it's like if you're giving a speech or a presentation and you are bringing forth a channeling, and there's something that you're putting forward and maybe something that you're excluding, right? Or there could be some deeper part of you that is rippling up through your energy body and you're like putting it out there. And so what is being reflected back to you is so vulnerable. You feel very seen, as opposed to how manicured or how curated that expression is, where it's hiding something, and how then your environment plays with that. And there's a part of you that is still, hidden and lonely as a result. So I think there's this beautiful opening process. It doesn't have to be a self-violation of just putting everything forward when we're not ready, but like an opening or a revealing process of, there's this side of me that I don't show or share with others, and I want to be connected there. I want to be met there. So I'm going to start opening to revealing that. July 24th, Mercury in 22 degrees of Cancer will trine Neptune retrograde in 22 degrees of Pisces at 9:35 a.m. Pacific. Mercury and Neptune trining in water signs here feels like a reverie, where there is often pressure about doing or action in our culture. Less is said about the value of simmering in reverie. But it is in this space of feeling and gestation that new inspirations, which later become actions in due time, if we're a part of the full cycle of these things, are born, like simmering, marinating, taking some time to intentionally let go of your hustle, your to-do list, etc., and just be in the bath or by the water or outdoors, for example, could be particularly luxurious and renewing. And I'm sure one could get in a flow state with Mercury trine Neptune too, about taking care of tasks or like washing dishes or something like that. But also just having that time to like really rest the mind and unwind and like be in a more flow state, however you do that. July 25th, Mercury in 25 degrees of Cancer will oppose Pluto retrograde in 25 degrees of Capricorn at 1:15 p.m. Pacific. There can be a tension, perhaps in a quite illuminating way, here between tenderness and sensitivity with Mercury in Cancer versus a more cold, severe, or authoritative force with Pluto in Capricorn. This can show up as becoming aware of where we judge or do not approve of sensitivity or need in ourselves and others. There's also a kind of love in the severity of Pluto and Capricorn, in the right moments, in the right situation. Imagine being in distress about something that's really just not true, and someone kind of metaphorically splashing cold water in your face. They love you enough to do that, where it's like, I'm not just going to coddle you in your state right now. I'm going to like snap you out of it. And that energy is, there's a severity to that, right? And thinking about when that kind of severity feels good in the system or when it is harsh. We could have a situation of someone being overly hard on themselves and someone else stepping in with some tenderness and warmth. So like the balm of like the Cancerian energy to the severity of Pluto and Capricorn. But either way that this plays out, there's some dialogue here between the more chaotic, sometimes even pre-verbal landscapes of emotion and a firm authoritative judge or supporter who may also be playing by unconscious rules and standards that come to light in these confrontations. This is constellated internally by how we show up for ourselves when we're in distress. So that, like, are we kind to ourselves or are we very hard on ourselves and asking ourselves to like get it together? It's a really interesting duality with Cancer and Capricorn in that way. When softness, when severity. July 27th, Mercury enters Leo at 6:12 p.m. Pacific and will stay there until August 11th. And as a communicator and trickster figure, Mercury, here in the sign of Leo, often relates to some joy, getting a reaction or a rise out of people, bringing people to expressiveness, laughter. Leo is the entertainer, the comedian, the jester, the roaster. And Mercury in Leo can be a comical lens, both for our perception and what we outwardly communicate. So Mercury in Leo can really emphasize our sense of humor. And that's not just an outward communication in terms of making jokes or playing around. It's like a sense of humor, seeing things in a humorous light. And I think Mercury in Leo is also intensely expressive. Like there's Mercury in any fire sign, I think, brings this force behind language or force behind the words that can be felt. And thinking about creativity and having some kind of impact or sharing vision through the word. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to all the Kickstarter supporters. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for being here.